sounds like a stupid question.
Probably is, because, yeah, go ahead. Skilled managers equals high morale, which equals all that cool stuff that you cannot pay for and you can't punish for. When you close off that feedback channel, you are not going to be able to hear the truth. In the first microseconds, your brain can't tell the difference between physical danger and what we call social danger.
I'm pissed off at you.
Me, specifically?
Well, just because you're my boss and all.
Employees tend to get promoted until they reach their level of incompetence. Go forward and don't suck.
Hello, and welcome to the Managing with Mind and Heart podcast. I am one of your hosts, Michael Nash.
And I am the other one of your hosts, Ethan Nash.
And you know what? Just again, we had a listener tell us just this last week that people still struggle with telling apart who's talking. Our voices apparently sound very similar. Are you still hearing that, Ethan?
No, I think we sound completely different.
Well,
I kind of have this like Morgan Freeman-esque voice to my delivery and tone, and you're a little bit more like Kermit the Frog, but that's just how I hear it.
That's how you hear it. Okay, Then. Well, I know that when I'm talking, I can tell when I'm talking, and I can tell when you're talking, and it's not me. But I think our listeners are struggling, but I don't know. I know one time we tried, you were talking like, I don't know, Gollum or Kermit or something, and then maybe I could talk like Batman, or we can just let our listeners sort it out, right?
Let's let them deal with it.
All right. Hey, Ethan, what are we talking about today?
Today, we're going to look at and kind of re-look at decision-making, and specifically decision-making styles. Several episodes ago, we covered just kind of a broad overview of our decision-making styles model. And I'll link to that episode in the show notes, because that might be a good precursor to this one, although not 100% necessary. And so we're gonna dive into this a little bit more today. Dad, you and I had talked a few days ago, as well as a couple other times, just about, when we're working with groups and we're helping them understand the decision-making styles, there's a lot of questions that come up. Right. It's actually, there's a lot of nuances with this thing, because it's a model, right? And the point of a model is you're taking pretty complicated stuff and putting it into, distilling it into simplified terms. So it's easy for everybody to understand and use, right, on a practical level. But there are lots of questions that come up, and I think some misunderstandings. And so we just want to review the 6 decision-making styles in brief, and then kind of talk about some of those questions that come up or common misunderstandings.
Yeah, that's perfect. And I even right up front, before you dive into, we describe the styles in a real basic way. Even the word styles, I've noticed, is one of those questions that come up from people, because, we talk about behavior styles, for example. Well, I'm a promoter and you're a conductor or whatever we are. And that's our style. And that's kind of how we lean. And that's not what this is, right? These are more decision-making options. And it's not like, oh, here's my decision-making style, and I'm going to now be doing it this way because that's my style. Mm-hmm. It's more, regardless of kind of where I lean, these are 6 options. And we really want to be using, most, not all of them necessarily, but most of them, right?
Yeah. And that's a really good point. Styles can be confusing. I like what you said there. These really are options, right? It's right. You have a decision to make, and these aren't about telling you, okay, here's the right option for this specific type of decision. This is more of a toolkit of, here are your 6 different options when you have to make a decision. And we'll get into that more. Are you ready to review these 6 decision-making styles, Dad/Mike?
Yeah, Ethan/son. Let's go through these. All right. Well, hey, let me start. Style 1. Keep in mind that on the chart, the visual chart that you can check out in the show notes, there's 6 styles kind of lined up in some columns, but style 1 is all the way over to the left, and it's called decide and tell. And it is pretty much what it sounds like, right? It's a leader who, based on whatever information she has, makes a decision and lets everybody know, right? And side note on this one, which is actually kind of a pre-answer to some of the questions that come up, this is the only one of the decision-making options that doesn't include consulting or working with other people in any kind of collaborative way.
You decide and you tell. All right. So style 2. Style 2 is where you almost decide, and then you go out and get some input, and then you make that decision. There's a few ways to almost decide, but basically this style is saying, you know what, I have a pretty clear idea of what decision I think I'm going to make, but I'm going to check in with my team to see if I might be missing anything, right? To see if I haven't thought of something that would be important, or to figure out, hey, if I do make this decision that I'm leaning towards, might it have some effect or consequences on the rest of my team that I didn't think of? So that's kind of what I mean by almost decide and then go out to seek that input before you make the final decision.
Yeah, perfect. And I think another example would be like, I'm going to draft a document and now everybody look at it and give me your thoughts. And then I'll take all your thoughts and now I'm going to complete my quote decision after I get your input.
Right. Makes sense. All right.
Style 1, I decide and let you know. Style 2, I almost decide, or I get halfway there and ask your opinions, and then I decide. Style 3, it's really important that we note this. I'm still deciding, right? Style 1, style 2, style 3, I'm still deciding. In this case, though, I'm going to seek input and then decide. So I'm not starting out with a draft or a mock-up, or I'm leaning toward this direction or that direction. I'm just saying to my partner or my team or whoever, I need to make a decision about X. Give me your thoughts. What do you think I should do?
And so between style 2 and style 3, they sound kind of similar. Mm-hmm. But of course, the main difference here is with style 2, you're almost deciding. You already kind of have an idea of where you want to land. Style 3 is you're not leaning in any direction right now, right? More or less. It's just open. You're open-minded. You're getting that input first before you come up with your conclusion. All right. Style 4 then.
Yeah, it's your turn.
Style 4. All right. Now at this point, we've moved away from decisions in which you decide, right? Decisions in which the leader of the group is ultimately making the final call on.
Right.
Now we're to the area in which the group together is going to make a decision.
Yep.
So style 4 is a vote, right? We know how votes work. Democracy, right? There's not much to say about this. Why don't you take us to style 5 there?
Style 5, consensus. Now, this is a big, tricky one. We're not even going to dive into it right now, but enough to say it's not a vote. And it's interesting because sometimes in a group, I might ask people, hey, what's consensus? And they'll say, oh, well, majority. No, that's the vote. Mm-hmm. Consensus is very different. This is in general, in kind of a simplistic terms. This is a group of people who decide we're going to work together collaboratively to make a decision, and we're all going to agree to support that decision in the end.
Absolutely. And we'll talk about consensus more a little bit later in this episode, because I think, at least from my experience, that's where a lot of some of the questions and misunderstanding comes from, one of them being the one that you just mentioned there. So style 6. So real quick, remember style 1, I decide and I communicate it. Decide and tell. Style 2 is I almost decide, seek input, and then decide. Style 3 is I'm not almost decided. Instead, I seek input first and then decide. Style 4, vote. Style 5, consensus. And style 6 is delegate. This is where you delegate the decision to another person, a group, a committee, right? Basically, you as the leader are saying, I am giving you or this group of people the ability and freedom and autonomy to make this decision on your own, however that may be, right? And if you're delegating it to a group, oftentimes that group would decide, maybe what style they're going to use to make that decision, unless you're kind of articulating what style you want them to use in advance. But generally, I'm passing off the decision. I'm stepping out of that decision as the leader.
Right. Let's talk about why is this so valuable? Why is this helpful? Why look at these 6 different models of making decisions?
Well, yeah. So again, these 6 styles or rather decision-making options are just for your tool belt. I mean, one of the reasons why it's so important to have a variety of different options for making decisions is because I think it's really important that a leader in a group finds a good balance in how they make decisions together, right? A balance of the leader, stepping up and making some decisions, the leader getting some input before making those decisions, and letting the group make them together. Imagine if you're a leader and you're always making decisions on your own, right? There's a lot of consequences to that, right? You're not going to get the input you need. You don't know everything, right? So, involving people matters. But at the same time, people get really worn down if they have to contribute to every single decision, right? It slows people down. It takes away from their core job functions at times. So it's about finding a balance between all these styles. Any more you would say about that?
No, I mean, I don't want to say what you said, but I guess I will just echo. I think it's really important that we find a balance between the leader's authority in making decisions, their power differential on that side, and on the other side, the groups they need to give input and have it be involved. And you're absolutely right. Too much consensus or too much involvement weighs everything down and slows things down and frustrates people. And too much leader decides everything, feels authoritarian and lowers. In fact, they both lower morale. When you're off balance. So I think the main benefit of these styles or these different options is if you can find the balance, you're going to be more balanced in your organization or in your work group in terms of leaders' authority versus employees' input.
Mm-hmm. And of course, and I kind of mentioned this at the beginning of the episode, often what people want to hear when we teach this model is, all right, so which decisions go best with which decision-making option, right? And I get it. That's a fair question. And this is a little dissatisfying for some people because you, as the leader of this team, you kind of have to make that call for yourself, right? We don't know. We don't have a perfect formula for what option goes with what types of decisions. That's why the idea is just work on finding the balance and use your own wisdom and intuition to figure out which style or which option goes with which type of decision that you have to make in your particular team or group or organization.
Yeah. I mean, there are some principles that help you with that, but after the principles are used up, yes, you're right. It's just intuition at that point and trying to keep that balance.
Yeah.
I also throw in there that, and we'll get into these, but it's just so important that, in using this model, managers, leaders, you have to let the group know each time which style you're using. And that seems obvious when you first say it, but man, I've seen managers who've kind of missed this quite often, and it's really messy, right? I mean, employees just want to know if they're influencing or deciding. They just want to know which one it is. And they're usually okay with whichever one it is, as long as it's balanced over time, but they just need to know, right? And so when you say something like, hey, everybody, hey, we need to make a decision about this thing, we need to make a decision about the 42nd Street project. Okay, we need to make a decision. What did I mean by that? Well, I might have meant I'm going to get your opinions and then I'm going to go make a decision, which later is going to just burn people out, right? Like, well, you said we, and then you made a decision. It's like, no, what I should have said was, hey, I want to make a style 3 decision here, right? I'm going to get your opinions, your thoughts, then I'm going to make a decision and let you know. But by not saying which style I'm choosing, it can create a problem. It can create a low morale issue. It can create some resentment and some trust issues between employees and managers.
Yeah, absolutely. They just want to know if they're deciding, influencing, or neither, and they're okay with whatever that is. This is, let's camp here just for a second, because one of the questions that I've gotten from a few people recently, and they say things like, I don't actually know which style to use with a decision, right? And so, I get that the idea is to tell people what style I'm using, but I don't usually know what style I want to use until after I start having a conversation with my team about this decision, right? So usually after some discussion, it becomes more clear that I should be using, maybe a style 3 or maybe a style 5. So the question I get here is really, do I really need to know what style I'm going to use before I even start discussing this decision with the team? And I'd be curious your thoughts on that.
That's such a good question. And that has come up often in my work with executives and others. I think leaders need to, there's going to be misses and there's going to be adjustments, but let me start with a perfect world. I really do think leaders need to stop and think it through first. I think, it's okay if they miss it and they have to change tack in the middle of it. That makes some sense and that's fine. But honestly, I just think it makes so much sense to say to yourself, all right, so this decision, for example, is going to impact all of my team because they're going to have to implement it. and they have a lot of wisdom and blah, blah, blah. So this is not something I just want to decide on my own. I'm going to use a style 3 or a style 2. Which one is it really? Well, I'm leaning toward this pretty strongly. I probably should just say that. So that makes it a style 2, right? I just think you need to do that work. And I think it's so much cleaner and clearer. And then, if you get into it and you learn new information that says, well, wait a minute, hey guys, your team might push back a bit and say, it kind of makes more sense for you just to make this decision, boss, for these reasons. Okay. I mean, we can adjust. So I'm okay with the adjustment, partway down the road, but I really think it's an important piece for the manager to kind of get this figured out ahead of time. So much so that I love it when I see meeting agendas that already have the decision-making style on there sometimes, so that people know what they're doing when they come into the meeting, that sort of thing.
I want to talk about style 1 for a moment here, the decide and tell. All right, I'm just going to decide and I'm going to communicate this to everybody. I think leaders and managers fall on all different spots on the spectrum here. Some may be more inclined to make a lot more style 1 decisions, and some may be more inclined to make a lot less. But the question I often get is, how do I know if I'm using too many style 1s? Like, I get that style 1 is a good option and that I should still use this at times, right? There are times when I just need to say, I'm just going to make this decision, whether that's for the sake of speed in making the decision or whatever. But then people wonder, am I making too many style 1 decisions? Right. And how will I know if I'm making too many style 1 decisions? Yep. Have you gotten that question before?
I have. I do. I've got that question many times.
And how do you respond?
The answer to that question, and it's just go ask. Just ask. And this is a really good opportunity to kind of remind our listeners, it doesn't matter what management skill we're talking about. Please, please, please be willing to go to your people, preferably, one-on-one, but at times even as a group, and just say, hey, I'd like some feedback.
I agree. And I've seen it work pretty well that, maybe quarterly or so, or, a few times a year, you have a meeting with your team just to talk about decision making in general, where you kind of gather this type of feedback. Like, hey, let's look out over the last quarter or half year or so, and all the different ways that, decisions were made. How do you think we're doing with this? Like, how do you think I'm doing with this? Am I making too many style 1 decisions where I'm just deciding to tell? Would you like me to make more? Where are you all at with this, right? I don't think it's necessary to do, after every decision, to then go seek feedback on that decision. I think that will slow people way down. But I agree. There's a pretty easy answer to this, which is, go get some feedback on how you're doing with that.
Yeah. And I want to just a little bit more on that. I think if I'm asking about the meetings in general, about how we could make our meetings better, more efficient, what we would like to do less of or more of as a team in our meetings, et cetera. Those are great meeting discussions to have maybe once a year, maybe twice a year. A little careful about I'm asking for feedback about me and my decision-making styles in the group setting. I think you may get the feedback you're looking for, and you just may not. And I've even experienced that in our own team. And I would say, Ethan, would you agree that we have a pretty high trust, respect team of consultants here at Nash?
Very much so. Yeah.
We have just an amazing team, and we have such a good community, and we really work on our adaptive skills with one another. And there are numerous times I will ask for feedback and in the group setting about things that are a little bit more about the way I'm doing things. And I won't get all the feedback that's out there. But then within a couple of weeks, as I talk to people one-on-one, it's like they're absolutely willing to tell me what they're thinking. So just make sure you're using the one-on-one options for those kinds of feedback.
I agree. And then that leads to another question that I've had, as well as people have asked me before, which is, hey, I'm doing this, right? I'm working on finding a balance with these styles. I'm going out in my one-on-ones and asking people their feedback on how I'm using these options and if, the balance feels right to them. And I'm getting some people on my team that are saying things like, look, I actually need you to step up and make more decisions on your own, right? I need you to make more style 1 decisions or just style 2 decisions, right? And others are saying, look, I want to be involved more. I think we should do more style 3s. I think we should do more consensus, right? So you're getting different perspectives on the team. that leaves you as a manager in a pretty tough spot because how do you address this, right? What do I do about this kind of polar feedback that you're getting in a sense? And I don't know if there's any good answers to that, but I mean, when you have experienced that before, if you've experienced that before, how do you kind of reconcile that? What do you do with that type of feedback?
That is really difficult. I have been in that situation. Many of my clients have been in that situation. It's not a vote. You are listening to these different people's opinions, and they're going to be polar opposite in some cases. And you've just got to think of it as kind of a style 3 decision about how you're going to make decisions, right? You're taking these different people's thoughts. You're going to have to kind of filter that through your own knowledge about the issues before you. You might want to seek input from feedback from a colleague, seek some advice that way. You want to get a sense of what the group needs. But I hate to say that. Well, I don't hate to say this. It's true. It really does come down to your own internal intuition and your own wisdom and your own sense of balance. And I think it's good to, and I know this might seem like it's a little bit off course, but once you've gathered that feedback from people, it's nice to be able to go back to the team and say, hey, it was really helpful to get this feedback from everybody. I heard some of this. I heard some of this. Here's kind of where I'm going to adjust. And that way the group kind of knows that, you had a wide variety of feedback and you're doing your best with it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I specifically like that last piece there. I think this is, an opportunity as a leader or manager to, show up with vulnerability, right? Show up with some authenticity and just, address the group of, I look at it. We have a variety of people on our team and some people want me to make more decisions, some people less. And I'm really trying to work with all of that. Right. And I am trying my best here. So please keep bringing this feedback to me. But just know that, I can't always please everybody in the decision-making style, right? And I'm trying my best here.
I want to make a really important point that I know we've made before, but please just everyone remember that styles 1, 2, and 3, what do they all have in common?
You, as the leader, are deciding in 1, 2, and 3.
And I want to remind our listeners of that because this is what comes up so often from clients. They will say things to me like, I've even had someone literally use this phrase. They've said, I don't use style 2 and 3 because the group might suggest things that I don't agree with. And then I have to disagree with them, or I have to say no, or I have to do it differently than what they would want. That's a feature, not a bug, right? It's absolutely okay for people to give input and not get what they want. People understand that that's the real world. And here's the bottom line. Styles 1, 2, and 3 are safe. Style 1 is safe because you're deciding, but you know what? Style 2 and 3 are safe because you're deciding. So all that to say, there's a ton of the style 1 decisions I've seen out there that could be made as 2 or 3. And without losing anything, you're considering it and then you're making your decision. You're still deciding, right? So it's safe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I absolutely agree with that. I was coaching an executive a few weeks ago on this exact point, and he was really struggling with the idea of do I do consensus or do I do more of a style 3, right? Where I'm just going to seek input and decide. And that was the exact thing I shared with him. I'm like, you know what? I think when in doubt, go with style 3. Right? It's because it is safe, right? Everybody gets a chance to weigh in.
Yes.
And then you can still make the final call. And with a really cohesive team, especially a really cohesive, leadership or executive team, people get really comfortable with style 3 in a good way, right? Meaning we're all going to debate and discuss and, have healthy conflict over a decision. And once it's all out on the table, I'm going to take that. I'll make the final call. And then we're all going to commit to that decision. We're going to say we made that decision together. Right, in a sense.
That's really good. In fact, you've described why I love style 3 so much. And what that reminds me of is it's funny because before we teach this model to people, it's funny how many leaders don't even know the existence of some of these styles. They haven't thought it through. So they literally believe that either I need to decide or it's consensus. And I see that sort of binary thinking quite often. And it's like you've given them a gift when you give them style 2 and 3. Oh, wait, you mean I can still decide and be collaborative at the same time?
Yeah. Yeah. Love it. All right. Real quick before we talk about a different style than, well, I know we're bouncing all over the place with the styles, but back to style one, decide and tell. What decision should be made with style one?
Well, get out a pen. But here's the thing, right? Legitimately, look at it one way, you could make all decisions as a style one. And so we can't parse it out that way. It's a matter of, there's some principles, like let's do some really big principles. So Ethan, what would you think in terms of, what are some of those decisions that are likely going to be style one? Can you kind of come up with some principles on that?
I mean, there's just some easy ones. We're having a team meeting, donuts, bagels, let's not do a vote or consensus. Like, I'm just going to decide, right? Or I'm going to get a variety pack, right? Like those are the easy ones, I think, for style ones. But I also think at the same time, there's other decisions that are pretty, impactful in terms of its impact on the team or the organization. And you just feel like, okay, I have the information. I need to make the call because we need to make this decision pretty quickly here. Right? That could be a place for style one. But again, you can use other styles for that too. That's why it's a tricky question.
Yeah, but you start with you're right, but you start with some principles. None of these are hard and fast, black and white. But yeah, the tiny little pepperoni or sausage or bagels or donuts, those might be style ones. And like you said, on the other hand, you might say, hey, let's vote on pepperoni or sausage, right? So style ones could be little things. We're meeting in room B for the meeting. I don't need to put a note out to see what room people want to meet in for our meeting. I'm just going to choose a room. So it's the little things. It could be the really quick emergent things. You're right. It could be the things that flow through you. And that's important that we remember that style one, at least for the team, style ones that come from me to the team, they might be decisions I didn't even make, but they came from laws or policies or executive director or whatever, right? I'm just passing them along and they're going to feel like style ones, even though I'm not the one that made them.
Yeah, I was doing a workshop with a group and, helping them kind of build some common behavioral commitments amongst each other. And I was going over this decision-making option model. And, there was one gentleman in particular that was really having a hard time with it. He was really having a hard time with the idea that we should work to find a balance of decision-making options. And the reason is because he was constantly working with customers in real time and having to make quick decisions, right? Just by the nature of the work, right? And so he was saying, look, I'm on the phone with customers. They need a decision like right now type of thing. Like that's just my world. And so I don't see how I could, find a balance with all of those styles, with all these styles in that situation, right? And so my response to him was like, great, those are the situations in which, yeah, it does sound like it makes sense to do style one decisions where you just decide in real time and communicate that to the rest of your team. And what I shared with him is that if you have, since you're making so many style one decisions in real time like that, look for as many opportunities to use other styles in which you involve people when that opportunity arises. Right. And so because people get caught up on this idea of find a balance, right? And they think, oh, I got to find a perfect balance. But if most of the decisions in my world need to happen in real time, I'm not going to be able to find a balance. And so I think people get caught up on the idea of balance. And when we say finding a balance with the styles, we don't mean an exact balance, right? We just mean looking for the opportunities in which to involve people when you can. I mean, would you agree with that? Anything you would edit?
No, I would agree with it. I would agree and add one thing. But yeah, the balance is not a mathematical balance. That's not what we mean. We mean a balance that feels balanced for the nature of your work and the relationship you have with your people. So what might feel balanced would be, 70% of the decisions get made as style 1, 2, or 3. That might feel really balanced for your team. And the others are made 4, 5, or 6, or some other, combination. So no, it's not mathematical. The other thing I would add to that situation you just talked about, Ethan, which is really cool, meaning that, this person is saying, I need to make a lot of style 1 decisions. I don't have time to get input. Here's one thing he could do is say, well, these are the patterns of stuff that comes at me from customers. These different sorts of things keep coming up. So I'm going to go to my team and give them these scenarios, and we're going to work together on some of the responses that I should be giving to these customers when these things happen. So now you've taken these style 1s and you've brought them back to the group and used more of a 2 or a 3 in a sort of a general hypothetical way. Well, now the group has given me input in these sorts of situations. Now I team. I can do those decisions. I can still make those decisions, but the group felt, the group actually did have some input and they informed my decisions.
Good. Yeah, no, that's really helpful. It makes sense. Okay. So real quick on style 2, which is just a reminder, it's where you almost decide, but you go out to seek some input before making the final decision. In our workshops, we often talk about avoiding what we call kind of a sneaky style 2, or what do we call it? Sneaky style 1, sneaky style 2. Basically,
style 1 disguised as a style 2.
Yeah. Basically, you're saying, all right, I basically have already made up my mind, but I'm going to go out to my team and ask them their input, just because it's probably a good thing to make them feel involved, right? Mm-hmm. Even though I already know what I'm going to decide, let me try to gain some management points here by involving them, right? So that's a sneaky style 1, because you've already basically decided and you're just pretending like you're seeking input, right? So in general, if you're using style 2, it means you are somewhat open to influence on that decision. What I often run into, and this is actually personal here, is I say I'm using a style 2 and here's where I'm leaning towards. Let me get some input. And then I actually kind of disagree with all the input, right? Like they all think I should do something different than what I was, thinking of doing. And I disagree with that. Like, honestly, I mean, how do you do that in a way that makes it seem like, no, I actually did consider your feedback and I just don't agree with it, versus this is actually a sneaky style 1, right? You know what I'm saying there? It's a tough one to balance.
It's such a good question. We don't usually often get that deep in this piece with clients in the sessions, at least. We do in coaching, but that's really good. Can I approach that a little bit from the side, but make sure I want to get to that, because that's so important. I think the sneaky style 1 disguised as 2 and 3. First of all, let's remind our listeners that you mentioned the range, right, of style 2. That can be everything from I'm slightly leaning toward this. What do y'all think? Or I've just got a super, super rough draft. I need lots of input. On the other end of the scale, it can be, I really think this is right, but I know I don't know everything and I want to get some input, show me where I'm wrong, show me what I'm missing, right? So that's a pretty broad range. And I think it all counts as style 2. I've kind of made up a little, I'm just to confuse the listeners, it's like a 1.5 style, like right between 1 and 2. That's kind of like, I am pretty darn sure, but I don't want to go through life thinking that I don't need a second set of eyes, on my decisions. And so, I'm pretty darn sure, but hey, Ethan, what do you think about this? This is where I'm going. I'm intending to do this. Is there anything I'm missing? Now I can see that being kind of style 2-ish, right? But it's kind of style 1 as well. So I want to be clear that it's not clear, right? That there's a little bit of a gray line sometimes between a 1 and a 2. Yeah. But getting back to what you're saying, right? So I'm, leaning toward, or I'm, I think I want to do this. I'm probably on that end of the scale when you, in the description, in the situation you described, right? I'm on the end of the scale that says, I'm pretty sure, or I'm heavily leaning in this direction, right? And the group is like, no, we see it some other way, or the person you're talking to has different opinions. My only thing I would say to you, not you, but anyone, is if that happens frequently, it's probably your problem. Right? If that's happening a lot, then I think we need to step back and ask ourselves, are we open to input? Are we trusting our colleagues? Are we trusting our employees? Are we, as opposed to if it happens just very occasionally, and if that's true, it's very occasional, I think we can have the confidence to say, look, I am in this role to make this decision. I've really factored in lots of things. I've looked at a lot of data. I've talked to other people. These people don't agree with me. I'm going to go ahead and make that decision. And certainly I'm going to circle back and explain, but I'm going to have to kind of go forward and have the confidence that I did my best.
Yeah. Well, just double clicking on that last point there is kind of the tactic that I've used. It's like, I'm leaning heavily towards the direction. My team thinks I actually should go the other direction. I actually am really considering that, but I still am deciding that I'm going to go the direction that I think we should go. Just circling back to them goes a long ways, like you said. And I personally get pretty detailed with that. Like, hey, this is the input that you gave me. Here is why I am still going, the other direction, right? I think the rationale there is really, really important to people, because without the rationale, I think people start to, think of it more as a sneaky style one, right? But if you actually give that reason why, okay, they can wrap their heads around that.
Yeah. And two things on that. I want to emphasize that last thing you said, that's circling back and really, intentionally explaining to them how you sought their input, how you considered it, so that they really do hear that active consideration of their input. I think you're absolutely right, because otherwise they're going to think you just pretended to care, right? Mm-hmm. But the other thing I want to park on that is, or mention, is a little bit of a red flag in your management life as that's going on. When that happens, my team thinks I should do this. I'm disagreeing with my whole team in doing this. That's a red flag, and it's not wrong at all. Necessarily, it's not wrong. But boy, if that happens again in a month, we really got to step back and ask yourself, am I going in the right direction? Do I trust my team? Do I have the right team members? Are we on, there's probably a problem if there's too many times where you're literally choosing something that's at the opposite end of the scale of what your employees think you should be doing.
Yeah, good point. It's kind of about frequency, right? Some one-off situations where or not, very occasional situations where you're totally disagreeing with them, that's going to happen, right? So yeah, it makes sense. Well, so, again, looking at style 2, almost decide, but you're seeking input before you decide, or style 3, right? I'm not almost decided. I'm going to seek input first, then decide. The big question here is, like, what are the best practices for going out to get that input from a team? And of course, that's a nuanced answer just by its nature, because it kind of depends on the decision you're making, right? If it's like, I have a draft of this policy, and I'm using a style 2, that's pretty self-explanatory in most cases. It's like, individually send me your edits or suggestions for this, right? But I think it's more of the decisions where it's like, this is going to require more of a conversation, right? We're using style 3, for example. I'm going to seek input and decide, and I need to get some input, right? What are some of those best practices for going to get that input, looking at it in general?
Well, yeah, let's toss this back and forth, but that is actually one of my favorite conversations in the trainings that we do, because I think I just watch managers, kind of the light bulbs go on for them as they discover all these new ways to get input. Because what doesn't work usually is, hey, group, what are your thoughts on X, Y, and Z? And then you wait 15 seconds, so you don't get enough and you kind of move on. That doesn't always work, right? So what do you do instead? I'll need to start with one. I am such a big believer in, if you have a group of 4 or more, just splitting them up for a few minutes. Just, get in pairs or get in groups of 3 or 4. And here's the question I have for y'all. Just please talk about this in your small groups or paired up for 5, 10 minutes, 15, 20 minutes, whatever it takes. And, toss it around, get creative, and then let's come back together. And I'm going to just go around and around and around, group to group, and get all your thoughts and write them down on the flip chart or on my notepad or whatever. It's just such a creative way to get people a chance to speak and be creative and get away from the large group where they're going to be more reluctant to speak up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And totally agree with that. And specifically like the small group brainstorm. And I like that for several reasons. I mean, one reason just being that, imagine your team, your group is like 10 people, right? That's actually a pretty common size for a group of people, right? But what we find is that large groups in general, when they're all together trying to make a decision, are much more likely to make biased decisions. Larger groups are much more likely to make biased decisions. In fact, research has shown that groups with 7 or more members are much more susceptible to confirmation bias. And so by, keeping the group to between, say, 3 to 5 people, and that's kind of the natural size in which we gravitate towards when interacting, actually, is about 3 to 5 people. It reduces that, those confirmation biases while still benefiting from multiple perspectives. So I like that if you have a large group, why not, split them up into two groups and put them in separate spaces and just say, imagine you're the deciding group here, right? And so, again, splitting the group up into small groups can actually remove some of that confirmation bias when you have a large group.
That's good. Yeah, that's really good. And let me stay with that a little bit, because there's some nuances in there I want to address. But absolutely, yeah, splitting them up. One thing to keep in mind, I think we can mitigate that confirmation bias, the group think, in a couple ways. And one is to remember, and this is actually really important about style 3, we're not deciding. And I want to be really clear about this. I think that this happens so frequently that groups kind of get confused, or the leader isn't really clear about what we're doing right here. And so when a group is together deciding, much more likely you're going to have confirmation bias and group think. But instead, when you're reminding everybody, hey, I'm deciding, and right now I just want a bunch of ideas, I want your thoughts and opinions, the more you emphasize that, the less you get group think. And so, for example, I might take my group and split them up in, I prefer like groups of 3 or 4, put them together and say, hey, I want you to, one model would be kind of what you said. Hey, pretend you're the one that has to decide. Your small group's deciding. Go ahead and come up with a decision. Now, that could be awesome if you have several groups, you come up with lots of different ideas, but there can be confirmation bias and groupthink even there, right, with 3 or 4 or 5 people. So what you might want to say instead is, hey, in your group, I want you to come up with 3 or 4 different options, right? Or come up with lots of ideas. So depending on the decision, you can kind of use those small groups in different ways to kind of avoid some of that confirmation bias thing.
In general, when you're working in a group, this is kind of reiterating what I said before, but when you're working in a group, it actually is, whether we know it or not, it's hard to know what you truly think, right? We're such social animals that we instinctively mimic others' opinions without even realize we're doing it. And when we do disagree consciously with people, we actually pay a price for that. There's a neuroscientist at Emory University named Gregory Burns. He just found that people who dissent from the group opinion actually showed heightened elevation in the amygdala, right? The kind of fear region of the brain. And we tend to avoid things that put us into that fear state, right? And so that's one of the reasons why it's easy for a group to just kind of converge and come into group think. And so again, I think one way to kind of avoid that is what we've discussed so far, maybe some small groups. Another way is just have people think about it in advance, right? Before we all talk about it as a group, right? And this is where the beauty of things like agendas come out, so they can think about the decisions that we're going to make. But I've seen people even ask people like, hey, we're making this decision. Before we talk about it as a group, just write down your thoughts and opinions on this, right? And this could be, whether you're going to do a style 3 where you're seeking input and decide, or even a consensus, right? And so by actually having people anchor themselves to their point of view before they talk about it as a group, it's much more less likely you're going to get that convergence and groupthink over an opinion. Right?
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. And again, really semantic on this one. As we're talking about style 3, I wouldn't say we're making a decision. I think that's part of the problem, right? So again, in the group 3 world, style 3 world, I'd say, I'm making a decision. Please come with your ideas. And I want to emphasize again that we can alleviate some of that group think in style 3, especially. It's harder in style 5, you're right. But in style 3, look.
And style 5 is consensus.
Thank you. Style 5 is consensus, right? But it's so easy to get confused in style 3 and have people think we're deciding, because we even use phrases like that. We're going to decide. No, that's not what we're doing. So it's a lot easier to kind of mitigate that group think when you remind everybody what we're doing here. We're playing with ideas. We're brainstorming. We're throwing stuff up on the board. I'm seeking your opinions. Lots of different ways of saying that and continuing to repeat that message so people understand that it's safe to give all these different ideas, and we don't have to spend a bunch of time agreeing or disagreeing with each other in a style 3 world.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. I think that the group think, you're still wanting to avoid that, even if you're just doing I'm seeking input, but I'm deciding, right? Because you're still going to maybe have those brainstorming conversations. You want people to speak, free. It's not about just speaking freely. It's about that it's just a tendency for us to say, people are, most people like, this is their opinion on the decision. Okay, that's going to be my opinion as well. So I think whether you're using a style 3, a seek and put and decide, or doing a consensus, having people think about what they would do if it was up to them in advance goes a long ways in terms of avoiding some convergence.
It does. And I think what happens, what helps too, is when you're in the discussion itself, here's the difference. If I'm doing a 3 versus a 5, again, a style 3, seek input, then decide versus a style 5 consensus, and we're in the actual discussion and one person is leaning toward A and one person's leaning toward B, and they discuss the pros and cons, but it starts to turn into, we have to keep pushing on this until one of us gets what we want, or one of us, gets to make the decision. You can kind of step back and go, okay, good. That was awesome. So you think, this person A thinks this, person B thinks that. Let's write that down. These are some great thoughts. Let's move on. So you actually get to kind of push past some of that when you're using style 3. You don't have to keep working on it until everybody comes to the same place.
No, yeah, you're right. But, to make the best informed decision, you would hope you would get people's, true opinions on it, with style 3, right? You want people's actual view on that to help you see the variety of different options you might have with this decision that you have to make.
Yeah. I want their real opinions. I'm saying once person A is given their real opinion and person B is given their real opinion, we don't have to keep working on that until they come together.
Right. That'd be consensus.
Exactly. Yeah. That's the mistake I see in the real world. That's what's happening. I think a lot of managers are doing style 3, but these discussions sort of degenerate into this, like, let's keep pushing. And you start seeing groupthink, you see people kind of give up, people kind of give in. It's like, wait a minute, this isn't style 3 anymore.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So consensus, speaking of consensus, I think consensus can be a hard option to choose for some people because you don't really know how long it's going to take to get consensus, right? Now, obviously you could give a time limit, like we have to make this decision by this date, right? But in general, I think there's times when people get scared away from consensus because they're like, it may take too long to make this decision. So my question is, should a consensus decision-making process be reserved for decisions that don't need to be made too quickly, right? Like if I'm saying we have an hour meeting here, we're using a style 5 consensus, and we actually have to make the decision today, like would that not be a good time to do consensus, given that it might take a lot longer than that to build a consensus?
I don't think you can say that. And can I first acknowledge that we skipped style 4, and that's fine, but let's real quickly throw that in, right? Style 4 is vote, since we're moving from 3 on up, right? Style 4 is vote. Quick side note on that. When would that come in handy? Like literally, let's take 30 seconds. When might a vote come in handy in a workplace setting?
I mean, if you don't care.
Sort of, right? Sort of. It's probably not the kind of stuff that people are going to go home weeping about, right? It's pepperoni or sausage. It's Christmas parties. On the other hand, it's, tons of people in this organization and we really want to decide on a benefit package and here's our options, or we're changing the color of the carpet. Here's the 3 choices. So there's, again, like all the other styles, I don't think there's a rule, but it's stuff that I think you're right, actually, Ethan. I don't really care. I mean, I don't mean I'm indifferent completely. It just means I can let go of this. I really want the group's majority to rule on this one. And it's safe to use majority because it's not something that's super personal, maybe.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. I think there's a place and there's time for vote.
So, but back to style 5, you asked such a good question. And it's really that you need more time. Can you make a style 5 consensus decision in a short amount of time? I really think it depends more on the nature of the decision, right? I know that seems really obvious, but let's have a consensus decision about, is our Christmas event going to be more of a training and a workshop sort of thing, or is it going to all be fun and games? Let's get together as a committee and have a consensus decision on that. Yeah, we can make that decision probably relatively quickly as a consensus. What's going to be our strategic plan for next year? Let's take 15 minutes and have a consensus on that. No, it's not going to work, right? And I'll give you one more example. We want to create a code of conduct for our meetings, right? We want to decide together, what are going to be the ways we're going to show up when we come to meetings so that our meetings are super effective. That doesn't take days. That doesn't take hours. You can do that pretty quickly and come up with a list of things and call that consensus. So I really think it has a lot to do with the kind of decision you're making more than it has to do with the rule of consensus.
Right. And probably it also has to do with just your knowledge and experience with the group in general, right? Sure. If you find that even those little decisions like that, and I shouldn't call them little, but ones that you would see like they're seemingly quick decisions, and your group can actually spin around for a while. Okay, give yourself maybe a little bit more time if you're going to do consensus, if that's your experience with the group. And at the same time, it's like, hey, if we're an executive team deciding on like our strategic direction for the next 5 years, it's like, yeah, don't do a consensus and expect to get it done in an hour, right? Like give yourself enough time to do really good consensus building. So totally agree with you that, yeah, let's look at the group. Let's look at the actual decision that you're making. And then another question is like, all right, what if we just can't get consensus, right? Like we're doing all the right things. We're, doing some brainstorming. We're doing small groups. We're trying to get there, and like we just have some people that can't support the decision in terms of where we're at right now, right? We can't get to consensus. Like, what are your options at that point?
I get that question all the time. What a great question.
Thank you.
So you get this, you do all this great consensus work, and you brainstorm and you make lists and you narrow it down, and everybody's getting there. And then there's this one person, right? This is just sort of an example of what you're asking, right? That just, everyone else is at the point where they're saying either, yes, I'm so committed to that, meaning that's exactly what I'm really super happy with where we landed, or they're saying, look, it's not exactly where I would have landed, but I'm going to support it because I trust the wisdom of the group. And everybody's there except somebody or a couple of people, and they're just a minority, vast minority, right? And they're like, no, we're not there. I can't support this. Full stop, right?
Can I just interject for a second? I mean, that is one case, right? Where say you have a group of 10 people or so, and there's one or two people that just can't get on board with it. Okay, we haven't reached consensus, but there's also the plausible scenario in which it's like a good amount of people just still are not on board with it, right? Yes. Like most of the group, right? So it could be either or. And either way, in the situation I'm putting forward is like, yeah, but we don't have any more time to keep doing consensus building.
Yeah, let's kind of parlay again, like we've done several times, back and forth with some ideas, because there are many ideas for this one. And I'll just start with one, which is going to be contradictory to what you just said. Is it absolutely impossible to find more time? That's the first thing I'd ask yourself, right? I mean, did I not give enough time in the first place? Is it true that there's a hard stop on this decision next Thursday and we really have to be done today? Or would it be possible to give people some process time to say, okay, look, we've actually narrowed it down a little bit. We've taken a couple things off the table. So here's where we're at now. Here's where we started. Here's where we're at now. So we've made some progress, but would everybody be processing and thinking and think about things like what you can support, what you can't support, what other ideas do you have? And let's get together on Tuesday. Right. So that's my first answer is, ask yourself, is it really true that you're out of time? How about you? Let's play these back and forth a bit.
Now, assuming that option is off the table, we actually really do have to make a decision. We're not at consensus. One thing is maybe, I guess, the nuclear option, or I guess that sounds pretty negative, but like, yeah, we're not at consensus. We have to make the decision by the end of today. I've gotten all your opinions. I've heard from all of you. I appreciate all of this. I'm actually going to now need to take this and make the final decision. So at this point, you've jumped back to a style 3, right? Where I've gotten the input. Now I'm going to make the final decision, right? Or in some cases, you may decide, all right, let's go to a style 4. Let's do a vote. We just need to decide right now, right? That both of those options would work as kind of like a backtrack when you're out of time.
And I would be really careful. I wouldn't avoid using those, because you're right. That's a really good option if you're really stuck at that point. I would give the group a lot of credit if there's any credit to be given. We did really good work here. There was a lot of authenticity. I got such good ideas, and we did move from here to here. So anything you can say that gives them a sense of success and not feel like we have to walk away with this sense of heavy failure on our shoulders, right? So we did really good work, and it's not a failure to say, all right, we're going to make this decision this way instead. I'm going to make the decision using style 3, or we're going to vote.
Mm-hmm. Good. Any more options here of what you would do?
I think kind of it maybe between our two options. Mine was maybe there is more time, and yours was, okay, let's just change our decision-making option. Maybe in between that, there are some tricks of the trade right there in the room. It might be a matter of everybody kind of go back to your corners, and I don't mean that literally, but if everybody can take some time alone and process through the parts of this decision or these different options that you can support, the parts you can't, what would it take for you to be able to support this? What would have to change? Get in pairs and talk through this and see if you can come up with something even more creative. So, I mean, we won't go through all these, but I would ask leaders to try some different things in the room to give people a chance to process and continue to come together.
Yeah, good. So there are some options there, folks. Well, so real quickly here, or it doesn't have to be quickly, it's up to you, but I want to come back to something you alluded to a few minutes ago. You're doing this consensus building process, and I want to talk about 2 scenarios that could come up. One scenario being, every time or most of the time you try to do a consensus building decision-making process, there's like maybe 1 or 2 people that are consistently the ones kind of blocking the consensus. Meaning it's like Joe and Jane are essentially the ones that are keeping us from reaching consensus pretty consistently every time we do this, right? It's a trend. Mm-hmm. I'd imagine, that's somewhat of an issue, right? If it's the same people, because at some level they might be, holding the whole group back from making timely decisions or making decisions at all when we're doing consensus. So let me start with that one before I go to my second piece.
Yeah, that's really gets into the whole side trip around coaching, right? And great conversations and crucial conversations, and our episode on Birch conversations and digging in with those people or that person around what their needs are and what's happening for them. But I think the bottom line is it's something you notice is happening. You're seeing the trend. It's not healthy for the group. And you're going to have to really dig in with that person and find out what's happening for them. It could be some needs that aren't being met for them that are coming out sideways in this way. They might be completely misaligned in terms of goals and purpose and direction with the rest of the group. There might be some ways they are inadvertently or even unintentionally sabotaging. They're not even sure. They're not aware they're doing that. It could be a lot of things. And so there's really not a specific answer other than this is really about relationship building and talking and digging in. And at times needing to just set some expectations and, hey, this is what I need from you for us to be able to be successful as a group.
And so the other scenario is, again, you're doing this consensus decision-making process and, maybe everybody in the group has decided, hey, we can support this decision where we are at right now. We can all support it. But there is 1 person or 2 people that are not there, right? And this is different than these are the 1 or 2 people that consistently block a consensus. But just like in this one-off situation, 9 of us are there. We can support it. And 1 person is saying, I cannot support this decision, right? Therefore, you haven't reached consensus. Well, what do you do when you just have 1 person, right? At one level, you kind of think, well, 9 of us can support it. 1 of us can't. I feel like we can just move forward with that. But if that was the case, then we would be in a style 4. We would be in a voting situation. But we're doing consensus, which means everybody agrees to support the decision, and 1 person is not.
I think this is where you get a little, you try not to be too legalistic, I think, with the definitions. Kind of like I said, there was a 1.5 style somewhere between 1 and 2. There might be a between 4 and 5 kind of thing. Because in that case, before I do this, though, again, we're going to do some things in the room, asking that person, what would it take and what's missing. And I have actually just recently, that you mentioned that, I was in a situation where I was able to see that person move to where the rest of the group was by just giving them a little bit more airtime and letting them have a chance to voice their concerns and The situation I was watching, when the person expressed their concerns about the direction the group was heading in, it was really nice because the manager in that case said, "Hey, I actually share those concerns. And so let's talk about some ways we can mitigate those things if they happen." So they were actually able to bring the person into the fold, so to speak, by just having some more dialogue, asking some more questions. Again, maybe even taking some more time. Can we come back and talk about this next week? But yes, let's say that all those things don't work and we're not there yet. I think there's a time and a place to say we're going to go ahead and just go in this direction, right? And technically, what are we going to call that? We're not going to stop and raise our hands and do a vote. We're going to say, yeah, we're really, really close to consensus. And as a leader, it just makes sense to say, this is what we're going to do. I understand. Who was it? Jane, right? That, you're not with us on this, or you're not there. Let's get together, talk about this and talk about some ways we can mitigate or, what you might need, but we're going to go forward. So yeah, I'm not going to call that a vote. I'm going to basically say that we got close enough.
And I mean, it's the important takeaway here again, this is a model, right? It's not rigid. It's to give you some guidelines. And so it's not like there's some doctrine here with consensus. It's like with all of this stuff, you're using your own wisdom and intuition and adjusting in the moment. And I think that's just important to keep in mind, right? Style 6, moving us along for the sake of time, is delegating the decision. I don't want to spend a whole lot of time talking about this right now, but I just wanted to open up in case you did have something to say. Just, what might be some either, questions or misunderstandings that you tend to get with style 6, delegating the decision?
I guess I would just say about that, Ethan, that there's just a lot of different iterations of this, right? I mean, there's, this subgroup, this ad hoc committee is going to make this decision, that can get really messy because I've been in situations where the subgroup thought they were making the decision, but turns out they were only recommending, and they felt really burned later because they spent time deciding and then they got their decision reversed because it wasn't clear up front what their mandate was. So, are we delegating, hey, you folks are the ones who have more information about this particular area. Would you decide and let me know? And we're going to go with that. And here's your parameters, of course, right? Or, hey, come back to the group or come back to me with a recommendation. So those are varying ways of using kind of style 6. I would just recommend to managers to be super clear with what the mandate is and what you're asking that group to do, or asking what that person to do, with that. But yeah, provide parameters. Also, I think you said this earlier, and it was good. If you're giving that decision away to somebody and saying, hey, you decide this, or this subgroup decides this, they can use the decision-making model. So, they themselves as a group of 3 can do consensus. I would think that would be the case. They could even do style 3, meaning they could get some feedback and some ideas from others and bring those into their discussion and then make a decision. So, giving them, kind of empowering them to use the decision-making model.
Good. Well, putting the cap on this discussion here, and obviously there's a lot more that we could talk about. I guess overall, if I have a decision to make, and this is basically giving you the chance to add anything more that we haven't talked about yet, but I have a decision to make, what considerations might I keep in mind to help me decide on what style to use with this decision? Like, I know we've talked about the fact that you got to make that call for yourself of what type of decisions goes with which option. But are there principles to think about when figuring out the style to use, the option to use?
Yeah, I mean, there are a few kind of big glaring ones. If you're going to use a 4, 5, or 6, right, vote, consensus, or delegate, you really have to be willing to let go and not make the decision. And that seems really obvious, but what we really don't want is delegating a decision or putting it up for consensus and then taking it back, right? And so being really clear that you're willing to let go, you're trusting the group to decide. Side note on that, please remember that when you're doing consensus work, you're part of the consensus discussion. So you're not letting go ever totally. You're still involved with parameters and involvement, things like that. Mm-hmm. That's one. Another thing I mentioned, and I'll kind of toss it back, is Have I been making too many decisions on my own? Is it really just about balance? And so, okay, so instead of a style 1, there's nothing to lose on this, right? Let's move that to a 2 or a 3. It's safe, right? I'm still the one deciding. So maybe it's about balance. Those are the first 2, I would say. And then I guess one more really quickly. Is this decision something that really does, I want skin in the game? Meaning I want there to be a lot of support and investment. This impacts others on the team. If those are true, then I think a style 1 is probably a mistake. If it impacts people and you need their investment and their involvement and their support, I think leaning into a 2 or a 3, maybe even a 5 would be important.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And again, the question being like, what consideration should I keep in mind to help me decide on what style I'm using? I think that point right there, like, does it affect other people, right? Mm-hmm. They will have information that I might not see. Mm-hmm. I think something to keep in mind is the fact that one of the top things that employees say they want in their workplace from their managers is the sense of being in on things, right? And we also know that type of involvement and it impacts people's morale, their engagement, their motivation. I mean, I know collaboration and communication that spans beyond just decision making, but I think it's important to keep in mind that so much research on motivation and engagement comes to, I want to be involved in decisions and collaboration that affects my world. So I'd say if there's one thing to keep in mind when you're choosing your decision-making option, it's that right there. People want to be involved, right? So find those opportunities if it makes sense. When you have that input from people and people feel kind of the psychological safety to be able to speak up when you're asking for input or, in a consensus decision-making process, that's where the magic happens, right? That's where it happens. So
it's great. And let's circle right back to, I might wrap up by going back to the beginning of this conversation. And then again, ask your people, take some time every so often and just check in. And we haven't said this yet, but I'll say this really clearly now. Make sure your team see this model, right? You're not the only one who should know about this model. So they need to know it too. Everyone in the room, everyone in the group needs to understand this model. And then you're able to check in on it and say, hey, how are we doing as a team on this? Would you like to see more of these or less of these decision-making model or styles? So yeah, ask for feedback, make adjustments, move forward.
Well, there you go, folks. There's some insights, some information, some ideas about how to best use these 6 different decision-making options. Hopefully it was helpful. Real quick, it is time for the listener question of the day. This is a new segment that we're going to start doing. Each episode, we're going to take one listener question and we're going to take a stab at answering it. This person says, I have one-on-ones with all my direct reports. My direct reports have been so appreciative of these. They have all expressed how much this has helped them in their job and that they feel more valued, heard, respected. And I'm benefiting from these one-on-ones just by getting that information in for my employees on a consistent basis. But my manager doesn't do one-on-ones with me. When I've brought this up to them, they have said they're too busy and it's not realistic for them to meet with each of their direct reports. And they don't have much to talk about because I'm doing a great job. They just say, schedule a meeting with me if you want to talk, as opposed to having them regularly scheduled. How can I help them see the benefits of having these meetings? How can I help them understand that these are valuable in the same way that I found value in these? There's the question.
What do I do when my manager's not doing X, Y, and Z? It's a thing and it's frustrating and there's a power differential. So how hard can I push? And, if I push too hard on it, am I, going to pay for that somehow? Or am I coming across as needy, which is going to hurt me sort of politically at work? This is a real challenge. This is a best practice management skill. And it's always frustrating when you look up in the organization and see anyone, quote, up there, not doing what to be best practice management. It's really frustrating and it puts us in a bind. And I I would start with the basic, kind of the birch up, BIR, behavior, impact, replacement behavior, meaning, this is what I'm noticing, and really focus on the impact, right? This is kind of why it matters to me. Here's how it would really help me. Here's how it would help me be more successful. So it's kind of making your case, I think, for, basically you're saying, as my manager, I am coming to you and saying, I have a need. I have this thing that would help me be better at my job and more successful, which would make the company more successful. Would you be willing to do this for me? So that might be an approach. Mm-hmm. Another approach, which is kind of like that doesn't work, and you've tried that and it's not working. You may have to come to an agreement that, hey, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and put myself on your calendar roughly every month, and I'm going to just do that. I'll take responsibility for it. I'll schedule it. So you might have to be the one that makes it happen. It's certainly not ideal, because you would hope that when you come to those meetings that they would also have things for you. But yeah, I mean, if it's all you have, maybe you need to be the one that schedules it in, come with some questions, come with some things to show and tell, come with some asks. You might have to kind of take more ownership for it than is ideal. That's the first two things I think of. What do you have anything else on that, Ethan?
I think the overarching objective at hand for you is you need to help them obviously see the benefits for them, right? Like, I hope they also just recognize that this benefits you, and they would want to do it just because it benefits you, because they're your manager and they want you to, feel cared and respected and all that good stuff. But what can you do to help them see the benefit? I mean, I think that's being pretty intentional about coming in with maybe some information, feedback that you can share with them that you think, hey, this would actually help them in their job, right? Or this would help them better manage. This would help them improve performance of the team, right? Really getting intentional about that first, right? And so they're actually seeing, oh, this is information that I kind of want. This is information I would actually want regularly. And in fact, if I'm getting this information from you, I wonder what other people on my team might have to share in these types of meetings as well, right? I mean, part of the reason we have one-on-ones that are regularly scheduled is because we get to, again, provide the avenue for our employees to bring up information, for them to share what's going on with them, to, there's a whole bunch of things that happen in one-on-ones that you can listen into our, one-on-one podcast episode. But it's also for the manager to help better manage, right? It's an avenue for information. So figure out the things that would probably be most beneficial to that manager, and as far as the things that they might want to hear, and start there, right? Start there. So there's maybe another way to approach that, or a lens to look at that through.
Yeah, and that reminds me too. You could even maybe share what you're saying. Reminded me that you are benefiting from your one-on-ones with your team, right? And that might be worth bringing in. Like what are the ways that it has helped you as a manager and helped your team in general? So that might be worth sharing. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would say the more trust and respect that exists between you and that person, right, the more likely it is you're going to be able to have these conversations, and you're going to be able to come together and, come up with a good solution. If there's already a lot of tension and, big power differential issues that are in the way, this just becomes much more difficult. Mm-hmm.
There are some ideas. There are some options. Thank you for the question, and all of our other listeners out there. Feel free to submit a question, and we'll take a stab at it in a future episode. You can send your questions to contact@nashconsulting.com. And besides that, thank you for your time today, folks. If you enjoy this show, if you find value in this show, if you would like to support us, please leave us a review. That is the best way you can support us, and we will love you forever if you do so. So there you have it.
Thanks, everybody.